Hello my friend and welcome to my channel Faisal. I hope that you're well. The fundamental building block of real-world JavaScript application are functions. They are one of the most essential concepts in the language, and so let's study function over the next couple of videos. So what actually are functions? Well, in the most simple form, a function is simply a piece of code that we can reuse over and over again in our code. So it's a little bit like variable, but for the whole chunks of code. So remember, a variable holds a value, but a function can hold one or more complete lines of code. So let's now declare our very first function. So we start with the function keyword. Oops. So we start with the function keyword, and then we define a function name. And now let's just create simple logger, which is a function that will simply log something to the console. So I will call this one logger, okay, and then we need parentheses like this, and we will see why in next example. And when we use the curly braces to create so-called function body. Okay? Function body. Oops. Body. Sorry. So all the code that is within this code block here, or is in this block of curly braces, is called the function body. And it is this code that will be executed when we run this function. So let's say we need to execute log many times somewhere in our program. So let's simply log my name. Oops. My name. Console.log. And here I just put my name. My name is Faisal. Okay? And so, somewhere in our program, we need to reuse this line of code here multiple times. And so, that's why we put it in this function. So, we create the function, and now we can use it. And we can use it as many times as we want. So, to use the function, we simply write the function name followed by parentheses. Okay, and that's actually it. Good. So, and this process here, or basically using the function, is called invoking the function, or running the function, or calling the function. Okay, so let me actually write these terms here. So, calling or running or invoking the function. Use what you want. And you will see you see me use these three terms here interchangeably, okay, in this course. So they basically mean the same thing. You can think of them as like executing or using the function that we defined previously. Okay, and as I said, we can now use or call or run this function as many times as we want. So I can do it, for example, 3 times. Okay, and each time that we call the function like this, then the code that is in the function will get executed. Okay, so in this case, what should we expect here? Let's see. So we get this my name is Faisal log 3 times because we call the function 3 times. And so this line of code here was executed 3 times. Okay, great. So we just wrote our very first function and it's already working just fine. And I hope that is logic of reusing code makes sense to you, but let's now take it to the next level and really use some more functionality of function, because they can do a lot more than simply using a line of code like we did here. Okay, so usually when we write functions, we also pass data into a function, and additionally a function can also return data as well, which means to give us data back that we can then use for something else in the program. So a function can not only reuse a piece of code like we did here, but it can also receive data and return data back. And so I like to think of function as machine. So I think that's a great analogy. So for example, let's imagine a food processor. I tell you, I like food. So maybe I use it a lot of time in this course. So we put food into the processor. Then the processor does something to our food, which is the function body basically. And then in the end, the food processor returns the processed food, for example, a juice. And so that's exactly what we can do with the function as well. And actually, let's implement exactly this example. So again, we need to use function keyword. Okay. And then we choose the function name. And just like with the variable names, we should choose descriptive function names so that we know exactly what they do. So let's call this one fruit processor. What I have wrote? Fruit processor. Like this. Okay? Not a good parentheses, of course. But in this function, we also specify something called parameters. And parameters are like variables that are specific only to this function. And they will get defined once we call the function. I repeat. The parameters are like variables that are specific only to this function. And they will get defined once we call the function. So let's give this fruit processor function two parameters. I will give him apples and also orange. And again, these two will get defined once the function is called. And they represent the input data of this function. Okay? I repeat again. These two, apples and orange, will get defined once the function is called. And they represent the input data of our function fruit processor. And this will make even more sense, of course, when we then actually call this function. And let's start by logging these two variables. So console.log apples and orange. Okay, to start. So apple and also orange. And so what I am doing here is basically use this parameter. Okay. So apple and orange just as if they were number variable here inside this function. And now let's actually do something more interesting with these parameters. And so we want to kind of simulate that this fruit processor produces juice out of the apples and orange that we give it. And so let's just create string which says that. So I will create string directly in the console log or variable if you want. Now let's do it in the variable const to be more clear, juice. And then here I will use template literal, okay? And I will say juice juice with, and here I will use placeholder, and then I'm using actually the apples parameters. Okay, like this. Apples. So apples because this apples parameter will be a number once we call this. For example, if we set apples to 3, then the string will be juice with 3 apples. And again, this will make sense, of course, once we call this function. So let's do it also with orange. Orange. Okay. So here we build the string using the input data that we get into the function, and now comes really cool part, because now we can use the keyword return. Okay, and with this we can return any value from the function, and so let's actually return the juice variable that I have created. Okay, like this. And so this value that we then return can be used anywhere later in our code. So basically, this juice will become the result of executing this function, and let's actually do that. So let's call or run this function. So let's write, fruit processor, and here I open, of course, my parentheses, and now we are going to specify the actual value for the parameters apples and orange. And so let's say, for example, 5 apples and 2 orange, like this. So simple, like this. And so this now will be the input of the fruit processor function. So you can think of these parameters here like an empty space that we still need to fill out when we are writing the function. And when we call the function, then later in the code here, at this point, we then fill this blank space by passing in the real specific value, which will then get assigned to the parameters, and this example, apple, will become 5, and orange, which is a second here parameter, will become 2. And this actual value here of the parameter are called the argument. Okay, I repeat, these 2 values here are called the argument of the function. Alright, so let's now actually run the script, and now we get, as you can see, 5 and 2. So this is coming from the line 26. This one. Okay? So it is this logging to the console of the apples, which is 5, and orange, which is 2. And apple are 5 because that's the value that we specified here in the, when we call the function fruit processor. And for same thing for the 2. So we specified apples as 5, and so in this function, the apple parameter, or you can think of this parameter as a variable, is now 5, and orange is of course 2. But now, you might wonder that, what about the juice that just produced here? Where is it? Well, the juice was returned from this function. So basically, that means that the result of running this function here is the juice that we just returned. Basically, once this function has been executed, this code here is then replaced by the result of the function, and in this case that's gonna be the juice string that we produced. So if we want to use that value that was returned, we need to store it in a variable. So let's do that. So let's call this variable const apple juice, like this. Okay, and then let's log this variable to the console. So apple juice. And now let's see. And now we get juice with 5 apples and 2 orange. So let's recap again what happened here. So we call the fruit processor function here with two arguments, 5 and 2, and this argument are the specific. So the actual value of the function parameters, which are apples and orange, and so when the function is running now, apple in here will be 5 and orange will be 2. Then we use this value to build this juice string here, and then we return that value from the function. And what that means is that basically the result of calling this function here will be the juice value that was just returned. Okay? And then we need to save that value somewhere. We need to capture it. And we do that by basically saving it in this apple juice variable. And then we can simply log that value to the console. Of course, we could also have directly log it to the console. So basically, without capturing the value that has been returned from the function in a variable. Okay, so let me just copy this call of the function, and I will put it directly here in the console log, and I will command this one. Okay, so we can run now, and we have, as you can see, we have the same string twice. So I can do it also with a variable to see it's the same thing. So take like this, just to see it is the same thing. Apple juice. Here is, we have the same thing twice. Indeed. Now the fruit processor function was executed twice, once here and once here. The only difference is that is in this case here we did not capture the value into any variable. So we simply log the result of the running this function to the console directly. Okay? So just to show you the difference. Okay, and now thanks to the power of the function, we can use the function with different input value and then get different output. So let's try that. Let's create. So I will command this one. Don't have a lot of message. So let's create const now orange juice. Okay, and so this time we can call fruit processor, let's say with value 3 apples and 6 orange. Okay, so once again we are defining a specific value here, which are the argument which we get passed into the function here as these parameters. So essentially what we did here was to create a generic function that works for any number of apple and orange. So it's really like we are leaving apples and orange as a blank space, and then when we call the function we will fill in this blank space using our argument. So 3 and 6 in this example. And now we can also then log the result. Console.log orange juice. Okay, and actually we can get write all of this command if you want. We don't really need them. All you want here is to produce this juice and then return the juice from the function. Okay, so maybe I let this one if you want. So let's see the result. So what we have now, we get 2 juice, one with 5 apples and 2 orange, which is this first one. And then finally the juice with 3 apples and 6 orange, and so that's the second one that we just produced. And of course, we could run this function as many times as we want. But we should call it at least once, because if we never call the function, then the code that's in the function will never be executed. And that makes sense? Right. So, without executing the function, it is kind of useless because the code will never run, it will never be processed, because that only happens once we call the function like this or like this here also. So as you see, this function here has no parameters, and so here when we call the function, we do not specify any argument. So we could do that. So let's just pass 23 or 33, for example. Huh? But since there are no parameters, it will not get used, and so specifying the argument here or not will not have any effect. You will see that this function, logger, also does not return anything, and that's not a problem at all. Not all functions need to return something, and not all functions need to accept parameters like the fruit processor that we have down here. So this is a very simple function, and this is a more complete example showing you everything that we can do with a function. And this kind of function is actually way more usual than this simpler one here. So function like this, without parameters and without return, we really only use them when there is a block of code that we want to use over and over again. Once more, keep in mind that this function does not return anything. All it does is to log something to the console, but has nothing to do with returning a value. It's really only print a message here to the developer console, but it doesn't return a value. So basically, this here does not produce a value because we don't return anything from the function, and that's why here we also don't save the result of the function to any variable, because it doesn't produce any result, while technically it does produce undefined, but that's not really relevant here. And so of course we don't capturing that undefined value. Okay? Great. And that's basically the fundamental of functions, and I am pretty sure that this was confusing for you. If this was your first contact with the function, and actually that's probably how it's supposed to be. So what I want you to do is to review this video very thoroughly and really understand how all of this works together. So how writing this generic function with the parameters works together with then calling a function with the specific values, and how the function then returns a value, and how in the end we then receive that value here and capture it into this variable. So that's what I want you to think about and to analyze. Okay? So as a conclusion to this video, we can say that function allow us to write more maintainable code, because with function we can create reusable chunks of code instead of having to manually write the same code over and over again. So that's the most important thing that you need to know about function, and when you know that, you will know when you should actually use function, and this is actually a very important principle for writing clean code that is used in programming all the time, and this principle is called don't repeat yourself or dry. So we say that we should keep our code dry, which means that we should not repeat ourselves, and so functions are perfect for implementing dry code because they are reusable code blocks that together make up all application. And of course we will use function through the rest of the course, because as I said in the beginning, they are a fundamental building block of JavaScript programs. And by the way, you can now understand that console.log here is actually also just a function, but built-in a function that we do not have to write ourselves, but you see that we just call it like our own function. So we call it using the parenthesis here, and then we pass in a value. So apple, orange juice, and the result of calling the function is simply this message then appearing in the developer console. And the same is true for the function that we use to convert string to a number. Okay, so number is a function, and I pass in, for example, 40, like this. So this is another built-in function that takes this 40 number, string, not number, of course, 40 string, in this case as a parameter. So we pass this argument into the function, and this function will then be executed and return the string as a number, and then we can save like we have done before. So let's say, for example, const num equal, I have made a lot of those when I write, I don't know, console.log. We can see it, of course, of num, like this. Okay, so this is gonna work just the same, as you can see. Good. But now, anyway, I will leave you to really analyze how all of this logic here works that we just wrote. So do that now, and only once you fully understand how this example works, you can move, inshallah, to the next video. Okay, I repeat, when you fully understand how this function works, you can move, inshallah, to the next video when I publish it. So I hope that you have understand this important concept that is function. Rewatch again the video, try your own function, try, and when you understand, see you inshallah next video to continue more detail about function, and I will talk about function declaration and also function expression, inshallah. Take care of us. Don't forget to subscribe my channel and to follow on Instagram, teams.winners, Faisal.chico, Telegram, Learn Practice and Share, and Twitter's teams.winners. I tell you goodbye. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.